As geotechnical engineers, we're intimately familiar with the importance of texture and grain size. Every one of us knows that the starting point of all of our projects is the understanding of what we're going to work with. You can pick up a soil sample, you can feel it, you can look at it, you can smell it. If you're crazy, you can taste it, and you have an idea of what you're working with. Grain size dominates the properties and the problems that we encounter in design. If you have loose, clean sands, well, liquefaction might be an issue. If you have soft clays, better design for settlements. If you have diatomaceous silts, you better run away from this project. However, as dealing with soil is our profession, we rarely consider how soil grains and rock affect the beautiful things we see, including those rolling hills you saw on your last road trip, the mountains you flew over to get here, the perfection of ocean waves crashing on a sandy beach. How often do we take a step back from the engineering properties of soil and consider how these materials make our landscapes beautiful? The old saying is that unless it floats or flies, you're going to need to design it on a good foundation of soil. And I suspect that the same expression holds true for the landscapes and the images we take attempting to capture their beauty. Let's talk about the grain size distribution of photos and how soil and rock are the foundation for these. I'll admit, when Brad asked me to do a Geo-PIT talk on photography, I felt pretty conflicted. I'm not a big fan of limelight. I'm nervous and uncomfortable up here, but I'm trying. And, you know, I was pretty content with my mom being the only person who looked at my photos. I was okay with that. But that's okay. More importantly, I thought, how am I actually supposed to tie these two things together? You know, maybe the art of geotech and the art of photography aren't so different. Our landscapes are largely made of soil and rock after all. Many of us are attuned to the technical, but artful, techniques we use to explore soil properties in the lab. This might involve rate of loading, control of water flow, the scale of observation, micro to macro, and the way we view soil. But believe it or not, many of these same things are very applicable to photography. But instead of the response of soil or pore water, we're talking about the response of light and texture. We also control the view, micro to macro, and how we look at the grains themselves, our perspective. Let's go on a journey of photos with a bit of discussion about how soil is often the hero in front of the lens. There's our grain size distribution, but we'll start with rock here. It all starts with rock. Here's a photo of the rugged Andes, which have an immense diversity of ecosystems, and for that matter, soils as well. In these steep landscapes, trees manage to grow on slopes of soil greater than 45 degrees that are largely kept in place by immense root systems. Regardless of your beliefs in cohesion, and there's a lot of them, it's hard to deny the amazing role of vegetation in maintaining slope stability, something we do as bread and butter, part of our profession. This is a long exposure photo, meaning that the shutter, or the camera's eye, is open for 30 seconds in this instance, where you use a stable tripod and gather light slowly because it's rather dark. You can kind of think of this slow gathering light as a drained condition. You need the right rate of loading to resolve the photo. Let's move on to gravel, cobbles, and boulders. Some of you might recognize where this is, and this is indeed Yosemite National Park. This is a place where rock weathering is rapid, leading to extensive rockfall. Cobbles, boulders, all this is coming down every day off of these cliffs. I appreciate photos of the stars for the same reason I appreciate soil grains. There's countless stars in the sky. The longer you look, the more there are. If you try to count just the grains of sand in your hand at the beach, the same idea actually holds. This photo is a very long exposure, 30 minutes about, facing the North Star, which is just off the camera there. You need a steady tripod, a shutter release control, some time for trial and error, crossword puzzle maybe, because it's going to take a while, and perhaps, I don't know, something to keep you warm. It's kind of photography's version of a consolidated drain test. It's going to take a long time. Long exposures tend to blur moving objects. In this case, it results in the star trails you see there, as well as the blurred Yosemite Falls. Those star trails that you see in the sky actually come from the rotation of our biggest soil grain, planet Earth. Sand. We got to talk about sand. Every geotechnical engineer has a special relationship with the beach, Mai Tais and sunbathing aside. The beach is a place where we can and do observe soil mechanics in real time. Slope stability, bearing capacity, seepage. No place can satisfy geotechnical curiosity like a sandy beach. These same sands enable amazing lighting tricks. One of my favorites is leveraging the zone where the waves are coming in as nature's mirror. You get the depositional patterns of the sand in the foreground, and the surface tension of water between the pores there yield a perfect reflection of an amazing background. If you have a very patient partner or friend, you can also have a neat minimalist subject to contrast against the otherwise bright image. My wife was very patient. She stayed in that pose for at least 5 minutes. Throughout much of Canada is a geologic formation called the Canadian Shield, which is effectively very shallow bedrock that's very old. And in some of these areas, you have thin, sandy, acidic soils, where you have these elven forests, basically spruce forests that are very old with very short trees because of these growing seasons. They also yield these beautiful serene pools and reflections that will also give you hordes of mosquitoes in the springtime that will eat you alive. So go at the right time for this. I always wonder how many viewings of the aurora these trees have seen. So this is one big part of photography is timing and patience to get the right shot. It doesn't always work. I remained here for about an hour and a half just to get the right photo. The clouds happened to be coming in, and they covered up the sky for the rest of the night just after this. I went home. The same patience is required for our experiments, for site exploration, and for those who teach students. Phase relationships, a lot of patience to teach that stuff. Let's talk about our overlooked friend silt. Like many of these photos, soil plays lots of roles. My favorite thing about this photo is actually the confusing perspective. It's achieved using a telephoto lens where you can kind of zoom in, and it tends to flatten everything, the background, the foreground. It's all one layer, if you might notice. The talus slope in this photo has boulders the size of a VW bug, but you'd be forgiven for mistaking it as just grains of sand. These distinctive, beautiful colors you see in the lake actually come from silt, rock flour it's called, that are suspended and deposited in the lake with a whitish color that give this kind of characteristic milky blue hue that you see. I always wonder what the folks in the canoe here are talking about. Probably fall cone testing or favorite slope stability methods, but probably. This photo is from Oregon, where I call home now. On the eastern side of the Cascade Mountains, big ice age floods and wind-driven erosion have created big deposits of silt that yield dry farming lands and really a beautiful, beautiful landscape. This photo is from the historic Oregon Trail, where there's lots of ghost towns throughout, abandoned buildings, etc. And it reminds us about what life was like just 100 years ago. This was taken during the golden hour, which is a photography term for that time of day, possibly after dusk or before dawn, where the lighting is perfect. It's hard to overexpose a photo, and it's often colorful. This photo is a long exposure as well. I love long exposures, but it's meant to provide motion in this case. You might notice the fast-moving clouds and the moving grass and canola fields in the background. They're meant to provide a feeling of motion. But at the same time, the schoolhouse remains stuck in the past, just like our use of SPT blow counts. Rapa Nui is an island of volcanic rock basalt, material that the Rapa Nui people used to build the moai, these megalithic statues that embody their spiritual ancestors. The softness of the rock on the island allow these statues to be shaped and quarried rather easily, although how they're moved is still subject to debate, and it's a great geotechnical problem, actually. They're moved on the ground. As many volcanic landscapes are, the soils are clay-rich, which makes growing things to eat very hard. According to some researchers, one possible purpose for these moai was to oversee and stimulate agricultural production, meaning that if clays weren't dominant in Rapa Nui, maybe these statues wouldn't be there. You can see the stars and the Magellanic Clouds are resolved through a long exposure again, for a 30-second exposure in this case. The moai statues are lit up with a flashlight in a technique called light painting, and it's meant to resolve both the great stars as well as the magnificent statues and the foundation they're built on. And what I like about this is this photo reminds me people have always been geotechnical engineers. Throughout this talk, I've talked about the zoomed out view of how soils make for photos and parallels between the art of photography and the art of geotechnical engineering. Soils are a foundation for our beautiful forests, the banks of meandering rivers, the talus at the base of immense mountains, Soils provide stability to our hill slopes, ecosystems, to our profession. But for all the beauty that soils provide us at a macro scale, they provide a lot of beauty at a micro scale too. None of us take soils for granted. I know this. It's our profession. However, my hope is that all of us take just a little bit of extra time to appreciate the beauty that soil gives us, whether it's a shear band or a sand dune. Thank you.